Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello. International best-selling author Lynne McTaggart has spent many years exploring the nature of human thought and intention and their relationship to health and wellness. Her best-selling books include The Field, The Bond, The Intention Experiment. Tonight, Lynne McTaggart joins me to share some of the extraordinary stories that emerged from the intention experiments, which then led to the experiments and discoveries chronicled in her latest book, The Power of 8, harnessing the miraculous energies of a small group to heal others, your life, and the world. Lynne McTaggart, welcome.
Hi there. It's great to be with you.
Lynne, in your best-selling book, The Intention Experiment, you invited people all over the globe to join you in an experiment to see if harnessing the power of intention could affect change in the world. The scientific study of ongoing results revealed that 31 experiments run to date, 28 have evidenced measurable change, and specifically all 3 of the global peace intention experiments had positive outcomes in lowering violence in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan and Washington. But that wasn't all you learned from those experiments, as your latest book, The Power of 8, reveals. So tell us what happened next.
Well, what happened was, around 2008, when I just finished the Sri Lanka experiment, I decided to survey my participants. I just wanted to find out what kind of experience they'd had and whether they had been able to get on the website. We ran these experiments via my website, so people would have to come on and all intend together, and I would put on my website the target that they were to focus on. So when I sent them this survey, and we'd had about 15,000 participants, I got back thousands and thousands of responses saying things like this. I felt like I was part of a higher network. I was sobbing uncontrollably. I had tingles up and down my arms. I felt like I was in the tractor beam at Star Trek, in Star Trek. Just on and on and on, these descriptions of some sort of altered state, almost like a mystical experience. And so that was bizarre. And I had thousands of these kinds of responses. And remember, people were participating by sitting in front of their own individual computer screen. Nevertheless, they were feeling this just incredible, palpable electricity. But then when I looked at, I had asked them, well, what's happened to you now? I also had thousands of people saying things like they had made up with their estranged relatives, they were getting along better with all of their coworkers, they were feeling like, even closer to their not so nice boss, and in particular, nearly half said, I am in love with everyone I come in contact with. I mean, they were essentially hugging strangers. And I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is going on here?
So, what happened after you had that thought? You decided to do some experiments?
Well, I carried on doing these further experiments. But the other thing that had happened around the same time was I decided to scale these down to workshops. Now, I have a background as an investigative reporter. That's where I started out in life. So I hadn't run many workshops before. I was, used to being doing stories, not necessarily being a personal development trainer. But with my first workshop, I figured, well, I ought to be doing this, but how do you show the power of intention over a weekend? So I was sitting there one day with my husband just kicking around the ideas, and then I said, I know. I think maybe I'll just put them in groups of 8 or something and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with some sort of health challenge. And my husband, being a good headline writer, turned to me and said, yeah, I love it, the power of 8. And so when we ran our first workshop in Chicago, I did put people in groups of 8. I had them choose someone in the group with some sort of health challenge. They all sent intention to that person. And I knew how to do intention because I'd studied the techniques of intention masters, and master healers, Qigong masters, Buddhist monks. But I'd also looked at what worked in the laboratory in mind over matter experiments, and I'd put that together as a simple program I called Powering Up. So I could teach them powering up, all the good techniques of intention, but I wasn't really sure how to do it in a small group. So I'm essentially making it up as I go along and telling them they've got to form a circle, they've got to hold hands, this and that and the other. And I figured it was going to be a feel-good effect, sort of like having a facial. That's not what happened. When they came back the next day to report on how they were, they took the mic and turned, and people said things like this: I have cataracts, and my eyes are 80% better. I have terrible arthritis in one knee, and it's feeling completely normal, and I'm walking normally. I had terrible migraines every day of my life, and my head is clear. And, and on and on and on it went. And so I did not know what to think about this. I was dumbfounded. So I didn't think about it. I just dismissed it as a placebo effect. But in every group I ran, and I've run, thousands of groups now, the same thing happened. These amazing healings after these little short Power of 8 groups. So between the two, I started realizing that something was going on here. There were healing effects of being in a group of intentions and intenders in a group. And also, in the case of our big experiments, there was a mirror effect. If people sent an intention for peace, their lives became more peaceful too. If they sent an intention for healing, they themselves got healed. And I saw that in our Power of 8 groups too. I mean, we had people who were the senders, not even the receivers, and people who had been stroke victims and their eyes started to focus, people who had terrible scoliosis and suddenly their backs were straighter and they were out of pain, people with MS who showed up the next day without their crutches. It was just extraordinary what was happening, but the same thing was happening, whether people were receivers or senders.
In those workshops, when you first started this, were the intentions specific or were they just generalized?
No, I always told people to be very, very specific. What we have found with our intention experiments and also in these Power of 8 groups is the more specific, the better. People sending intention to someone, say with pain, with arthritic pain on the right side, you focus on where it is. Our intention is that Jane Doe be free of all pain in her right hip and be healthy and well in every way, that kind of thing. So be very, very specific.
So while the group of 8 was sending that to one member of the group, everybody was experiencing something. Is that correct?
Well, many of them were. I mean, I can give you a wonderful example. A guy called Wes Chapman. He was in a group. I put together a couple of groups as a little experiment last autumn from the Mile High Church in Denver. And Wes had a very sad story. He was going to be a scientist, and when he was at university, he got drafted the very last year of the war, and at that point you couldn't have deferments for college, so he had to go. And the experience was so awful and depressing that he came home very depressed and traumatized, and his life just continued to go into a downward spiral. The only little light part of his life was his second marriage, and then his wife died of cancer, and the medical bills were so huge that he'd had to sell his house and essentially live out of a truck driving long distance to try to pay those bills. And he'd got to the point where I met him at about, I think he was 65. He lived in a senior community, and he just kind of got to the point of what's the use. Even getting up in the morning or doing the simplest thing like making himself breakfast was too much effort. So he was pretty depressed. But when he was in that group, he didn't feel that he should get the intention for his depression. He felt that one of the other people who had cancer was more deserving. So he just sent intention to her, as everyone else did. And by the way, her cancer went from stage 4 to stage 1 now. But Wes had an amazing epiphany. I mean, the next day, and I talked to him a few days later, he said, my God, I woke up and everything is so changed. The grass is greener than it's ever been. The flowers smell sweeter. Getting up is so easy now. Doing any activity is so easy now. And then I spoke to him a few months after that, and suddenly I heard he was doing power walking for 90 minutes. He was lifting weights. He said, I feel like I'm in my 20s, not my 60s now. And he even had a dream that he'd met his 19-year-old self, who somehow communicated to him, there's still time. And Wes is a really changed person, and yet the intention wasn't about him. It was about sending to someone else, and that was the big powerful thing for him.
Did you experiment with groups of 6 or 12 to see whether there was something magic about 8?
8, remember, was a complete fluke. Just me saying, I don't know, I'll put them in groups of 8. And I make that really clear in my book. Yes, we've experimented with 8 and 12. 8 works, 12 works. I mean, I think 6 works. 8 is kind of an ideal number, and a lot of people have said they feel it works better with 8, but I don't have any hard data to say that, and I certainly didn't use 8 because of any sacred geometry or the idea that 8 is a sideways infinity and all of those wonderful things. That's just something, to impose on it. It was just an accident. At least that's what it seemed to be. But what I found is 8 is a Goldilocks number in the sense that it's not too few and it's not too many. And I would say anything, if you have smaller than 5, it's not enough, and more than 12, it starts getting a little unwieldy.
Yeah, it is a very manageable number. I think you're right. But it would be interesting to see if 16, you get twice the results.
I don't think it works like that because I've done the big experiments looking at groups, larger groups versus smaller groups. I mean, for instance, we did one experiment with seeds, trying to make seeds grow faster. And I worked with the University of Arizona on this experiment. They set up a very controlled experiment where they had 4 sets of 30 seeds in a seed tray labeled A, B, C, or D. Wherever I was speaking in the world, I would invite my audience to be part of this experiment. So, for instance, the first time we tried it, I was in Sydney, Australia, with an audience of 700, and I invited them to choose seeds A, B, C, or D. We chose them. We didn't tell the scientists which ones we were going to send intention to. I showed them the photograph they had sent of that one set of seeds. We sent intention to the seeds. Then I called up the scientists afterward to say, we're done, plant the seeds. But I still didn't tell them which ones we sent intention to. They planted all 4 sets and then measured them 5 days later. And only when they'd finished measuring did I unblind the study and tell them, well, it was whatever seeds it was, seeds A, let's say. Now, I did that with a group of 700. The seeds, by the way, were sitting in a lab in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. And also, we weren't even sending intention to the seeds themselves. We were sending intention to a photograph of the seeds, a symbol of the seeds. Nevertheless, we had an amazing effect. The seeds that got sent intention grew significantly higher than the controls. We ran it 5 other times and then had 6 control studies too. And of the 5 other times, we had different size audience. I had sometimes just groups of 100, and sometimes I had thousands over the Internet. Nevertheless, every single time the seeds sent intention grew higher than the controls, and it didn't matter whether they were 100 or several thousand.
That's amazing, and I don't doubt this for 1 minute. I'll have a story to share with you, Lynne, when we get back from the break. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with international best-selling author Lynne McTaggart about her latest book, The Power of 8, which documents her evidence for the power of group intention. We'll be back after the break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Hello, this is Dr. Donise Warden, and I'm excited to tell you about homeopathic injections from Hevert Pharmaceuticals. I utilize them in my practice for pain, inflammation, depression, and other medical conditions. I'm achieving excellent results, and I've seen no adverse reactions. I encourage you to explore these novel treatments.
Call Hevert today at 855-387-6466 to find a practitioner in your area to administer these FDA-registered medications. 855-387-6466.
Change and growth are part of natural life and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
My name is Meera Batra, and this is How I Live United. Many families have come to America for a better life. I advocate for these families with United Way. United Way empowers them to see opportunities available. We help them get involved with their kids, schools, and network within the community. My name is Meera Batra. I help families see opportunity and succeed. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Lynne McTaggart, I've been a follower of your work since the very early days when you first released the What Doctors Don't Tell You newsletter back, years and years ago in England. So I've read every single one of your books and, I've been really interested to follow your work. So when I met Bill Tiller some years ago, and I know Bill has also done some work with intention, I introduced him to a friend of mine who was working with the higher consciousness of autistic children. And Bill and Susie Miller set up the Autism Intention Experiment. And what was fascinating about that was the night, and he was broadcasting it through one of his unimprinted intention devices that he imprinted with an intention, and broadcast it via computer to practitioners of Susie's all over the world, many of whom had autistic children. What was interesting about that was the night before they started the broadcast, Susie Miller was getting calls from those practitioners telling her of the miraculous things that were happening with those autistic children. Have you ever looked at what happens before you broadcast your intentions?
Yeah. But we're measuring usually before, during, after. And sometimes, one or two of the times, now I was trying to be very consistent and saying, considering if the effect happened early, we didn't consider it something that was successful. But one of the times we had a big effect just before we sent intention. And as I say, I had to try to be consistent, as scientific as possible, so we wouldn't consider that a success. But one time we did, and some people had got in early and just started intending early. So, yes, and of course there is the wonderful work of the Global Consciousness Project by Roger Nelson, where he has been looking at the power of collective consciousness for years, looking at what happens during moments of global happiness or calamity, like with the Twin Towers disaster. And he does this by running a lot of random event generators, having them going continuously, and measuring the effects of these random machines, which usually have an output of, say, heads and tails. So about 50% heads, 50% tails. You know, even though they're random, that is pretty much what it works out. But they veer off their random course, and they have done repeatedly in moments of, you know, collective horror, like with the Twin Tower disaster, or collective joy, like the Millennium celebrations. And he, of course, has measured our intention experiments and found effects every single time, just in our 10-minute window of intention. But a very interesting thing that's happened to him is, for instance, when the Twin Towers thing happened, the machines probably reacted more than they ever have. But they reacted right before the first tower got hit.
That's
so it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because we hear that animals, you know, their senses are so acute, they can tell before an earthquake strikes. So clearly there is, you know, well, there's no such thing as time, so it's not surprising. Yeah. But, yeah, this is an interesting one, because it really, that for me provides even more evidence of this, you know, the collective consciousness at work.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I know, and, you know, we are now seeing it, with so much evidence with our intention experiments that there is some sort of power in the collective. You know, and I in my book, I really sought to try to understand this because, you know, for many years, I was having a hard time believing it. I mean, there are such astonishing effects that happen in these Power of 8 groups. I kept saying to myself, no, that's just a placebo effect, until it kept happening where really extreme and intractable illnesses were getting instantly healed, but also the senders were getting healed. And that, to me, was really bizarre, because then that suggested that it wasn't just a placebo effect, that something really amazing was going on here.
Well, even the placebo effect is now being studied and shown, you know, that it works. So, you know, how does it work? We don't know. But I think you're absolutely right that it's the part that it's the other part, the surprising part about the fact that the intentioner is also experiencing the results that's fascinating there. Do you think that may be because they're being put into a field of grace or peace, or, you know, something is happening to them on some level just by the very fact that they're spending the time creating that intention?
Well, I think what's happening is probably a bit of everything. There is the power of intention and collective intention. There is the power of the group and the collective, you know, effects of the group. There's, you know, Émile Durkheim, the French psychologist, once called it collective effervescence. When people come together in a group, something magical happens. But there's also the power of altruism. And I really looked at this in great detail. You know, the science of altruism is really quite amazing. Altruism is like a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people, and that would include thinking well for them, you know, trying to heal them, live longer, are healthier, are happier in every regard. And also there have been really interesting studies. For instance, one amazing prayer study where a psychologist who also happened to be a priest in Berkeley, California, wanted to try to see if prayer could work for mental illness, because there's plenty of evidence showing prayer has worked in some studies for physical illness. So he got a group of 400 volunteers who had depression, had clinical depression, and he got them together and he divided the group in half. One half were going to get the praying, and the other half were going to give the praying. Now, the people who got the prayer, afterward he then measured them, you know, to see whether there were any improvements according to all kinds of psychological parameters. The people who got the prayer did well. they were improved, but not as improved as the people who gave the prayer. And that has been demonstrated over and over in these small intention groups. One year, 2015, I wanted to really study how these things worked and why. So I decided to put together 250 people who would be part of an intention master class, a year-long project where I would teach them over 6 teleseminars and then put them into small groups of about 8, and then monitor everything going on with them for an entire year. And I looked at their health, their relationships, their finances, their career, their life's purpose, and month on month on month. Now, we had extraordinary stories. Of the 250 people, about 150 continued to meet regularly in their group over the year and beyond. Now, of those 150, pretty much 100% of them had major life changes of some sort. Some guy with chronic depression discovered the cause of it. He'd had lifelong depression, and it was difficult because he was a clinical psychologist, but an integrative psychologist. So he tried everything, and nothing worked. And he discovered with his group, when his group sent intention for him to find the cause of this depression, he discovered one of his liver filtration systems wasn't working. And once that was sorted, he was sorted, and the depression lifted. We had another woman with 15 years worth of chronic fatigue, could barely exercise for 5 minutes. She's now lifting weights and going hiking. We had loads of physical healings. One woman regained her hearing. And we had people getting amazing startups. We had people who were had financial windfalls just when they needed it. All kinds of things like that. But we had 1 or 2 people who weren't getting anywhere. So with one of them, Andy was a young woman who had 2 small children. She was just going through a divorce, and she needed new income. She had sold her gift store business, but she needed a new job, and she wanted to be in marketing or coaching, and she had a lot of skill sets, but she wasn't getting any kind of nibbles anywhere. She was trying everywhere. And we tried intending everything for her. And when it finally just didn't work time and time again, I finally said to her, Andy, just get off of yourself. Start intending for someone else. And I had someone else in mind, a young boy of 15 who'd tried to kill himself after his first serious girlfriend broke up with him. And so he'd thrown himself off of a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. And he survived, but everything was broken. So we started sending healing intention to Luke over 3 separate occasions, and Andy did the same. Luke got out of the hospital in record time. He healed. It was really quite amazing. Maybe it was us. Maybe it was just good doctoring. But the interesting thing is what happened to Andy. As soon as she started intending for Luke, the very next week, she gets a call out of nowhere from somebody she doesn't even know, offering her a dream job. And that kind of thing happened over and over again, too many times for it to be coincidence. That power of getting off of yourself.
Do you do you define a difference between intention and prayer?
I think intention is more focused. I think prayer tends to be being a supplicant, saying, God, you decide, thy will be done, whatever you decide. With intention, it's a little more focused. It's still a request, but it usually is a very specific request to the universe. So there's a lot of overlapping elements to it. It's just slightly different.
I guess, too, there's the factor that with intention, you are being the creator rather than relying on someone else to be a creator.
Yes. You are, but let me define that too, instead of God being an other. You're kind of acknowledging the God within you, that ability to create, and that, as you say. And so it's not that it is necessarily completely secular. There's a big spiritual component to it, particularly when you see how powerful these power-based groups are. But I think you are, as you say, you're acknowledging, hey, the God is within me, the Creator is within me, and my group.
did you find in your experiments that the skill level of people had any effect on the outcome?
Yeah, I think people who were more practiced and skillful definitely experience counted. With that seed experiment, the biggest outcome occurred among healing touch practitioners. When I spoke in front of them, the seeds grew twice as high as the controls. The seeds set intention. And I think experience does count. Certain techniques do count, the right heart state, the right mind state, that ability to focus on the other, the ability to focus full stop, a very focused, energized mind state. All of those things are the kinds of things I talk about in my program, Powering Up. That's in my book, The Power of 8, and that I teach in my master classes.
So as you're teaching and as you're leading these seminars, are you participating in sending out intentions? And if so,
sometimes. Well, I get the same experience as everybody else does, that incredible sense of energy. I mean, I remember with my intention experiments, initially feeling like something was weird, that I was imagining it, because I was feeling such intense heat and energy off of my computer when I was part of those experiments that I kept thinking, I'm just hallucinating here. This is ridiculous. I'm here by myself in front of this computer. But I felt all of that. If I'm part of a group, I feel that kind of intense, altered state. I can feel myself slipping into a kind of altered state right away. I mean, most of the time when it's Power of 8 groups, I'm leading them. I'm not part of them.
Yeah.
But when I have been, I feel what everybody else is feeling.
Are you also finding that, the more practiced a group gets, the stronger the effects?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that, after I watch my year-long intention master classes, when people do get to be intention masters, I mean, they do learn how to really focus their intention, how to get off of themselves, how to phrase their intentions, how to be very specific, the kind of mindsets and heart states, to get into. All of those things really make a difference.
So it almost, we should perhaps, cancer patients, many clinics will offer them, healing touch. They'll, tell them to do things that make them happy and make them laugh. And perhaps they should be setting up intention groups. If they are sending out intentions, the rebound effect will benefit them.
Absolutely. Well, and also, doing it for each other. I mean, there's so many fantastic studies of that power of doing it in a group like that, and how, there's a kind of there's such a wonderful mirror effect, and it's a virtuous circle, too. I mean, so interesting. When people do something altruistic, it fires up the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve of the body. It winds from the back of the neck through all of the major organs of the body, and it helps in the release of things like oxytocin, that the love hormone that gets released when you are caring for children, say, or you're with your beloved. And it also has a profound effect on the immune system. It just keeps regenerating the immune system, essentially. It keeps strengthening it. And so that important factor of getting off of yourself, I think, is one of the key elements that really creates this kind of healing magic.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when we get off ourselves and we're thinking about others, we are connecting in the field. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with international best-selling author Lynne McTaggart about her latest book, The Power of 8. We'll be back with more after this break.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Hello, this is Dr. Donise Worden, and I'm excited to tell you about homeopathic injections from Hevert Pharmaceuticals. I utilize them in my practice for pain, inflammation, depression, and other medical conditions. I'm achieving excellent results, and I've seen no adverse reactions. I encourage you to explore these novel treatments.
Call Heaver today at 855-387-6466 to find a practitioner in your area to administer these FDA-registered medications. 855-387-6466.
Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the Internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
I'm Fidel Nshambo. I was born in a city called Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America, and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Lynne McTaggart, looking back over your body of work, there's a clear pathway running through all of your books from the field, which revealed that the human mind and body are not separate from their environment, the bond, which demonstrates we're in constant relationship with everything and everyone, the intention experiment, which demonstrates that thought's a thing that affects other things, and now with the power of 8, which provides solid evidence that we can harness the power of intention to help one another. When you look back over that work, I mean, and it really has transformed you. You've said that it's transformed you from a hard-nosed journalist and a skeptic to a believer. Where's it going? I mean, what's the next step for you?
I think it's going to be very interesting to take the bond even further. The whole idea that not only are we connected to each other in every way, but that we need to live in a new way. If we aren't separate, if this is our new story, and all of those books are really all about the new story that new science is writing about who we are, and the latent powers that we have within ourselves, then we have to live in a very different way, because the way we live now is essentially I win, you lose. It's all about competitive individualism, and that really needs to change.
When you started your career as an investigative reporter, I mean, did you have any clue that your interests would take you down this path?
Well, the great old saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your future plans. I had no idea, never planned in any way to do everything that I've done. I mean, other than write books and start out life as an investigative reporter. That was very deliberate in my 20s. But early on in that career, when I was writing my second book, my publishers suggested I go to the UK to research a biography. This was before I got into all the field stuff. And that brought me to the UK, and I fell in love with the UK from the moment I got off the plane, and then I fell in love, and that became where I've stayed. And I've, have a family and my husband and 2 grown-up daughters now as a result of being here. And I certainly didn't expect to get involved with a newsletter, now an international magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You. And from there, I never expected to do all of this field stuff, but it was really each led into the other. So the field came about because we read a lot of medical literature for What Doctors Don't Tell You. And in the early 90s, I kept seeing these great these great scientific studies of spiritual healing. And, there's quite a number of them demonstrating this stuff works. And I kept thinking, well, if you can send a thought to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we say about how the world works. And there has to be a new explanation. So that really set me on a quest to find out what it was. I expected frontier scientists were going to talk to me about something like human energy fields. I didn't think they were going to talk to me about a quantum field and how we are all connected and all of the other things demonstrating that we are far more connected than we've thought. And all of those things that I discovered were really that each of these scientists was discovering a little patch of what added up to a completely new continent, a completely new view of the world and a completely new view of how we work too. So that really set me on the path, and all of the subsequent studies and all of the subsequent books have really been all about trying to explore this further.
The original, the newsletter, What Doctors Don't Tell You, which I said, I first came across back in the 90s when I was living in England. I mean, that was very, very courageous thing to do at that time.
I think it's a more courageous thing to do now because back then, we were lauded as a voice in the silence. That was our first issue, got put on a big page of the Times and written about, and all of the papers called us, wonderful for what we were doing, really important work. And after the millennium, when a lot of publications have had many more ties with the government and big pharmacy, big pharma, that kind of independent thinking has gone in a lot of these publications, and they have, we've been under more attack more recently by, skeptic organizations trying to close us down. Happily, we have many more supporters than skeptics, and our supporters, when they've taken us out of a store, as they did in 2013, a supermarket caved into some of that pressure because these skeptics were writing to stores and demanding that we be banned. Our readers banned the store. They boycotted the store, so they had to put us back in there. So, we've had a lot of support by people who really want the information about medicine.
And it's interesting how it's all beginning to merge now, the science, the spirituality. Even in medicine, we know the placebo effect works. We know that people can get better when you send intentions to them. So the lines are blurring.
They really are. They really are. Well, we're now sort of getting that, that we are something more than chemicals and electrical signaling, that, there is this consciousness that is not necessarily locked inside our skulls, but that is all pervasive, that perhaps we don't die, when consciousness doesn't die, when we do. There's too much information now about near-death experiences of people who were completely conscious during comas and all of that kind of thing for us to say, yeah, there's something more here. This reality that we have described is way out of date.
So do you feel now that you've got a kind of mission to continue this work until the results are absolutely, conclusive?
Well, yeah, I continue. We had 2 big intention experiments in the autumn that we are just collating now. The first one was a big American peace intention experiment. We sent intention to the most violent street in America in St. Louis, Missouri. And we're collating those results. They look pretty good. It looks like violent crime went down in that area, and property crime did not. But we were focusing on violence, so that's interesting. And nor did it change in the rest of St. Louis. So that's quite an interesting result. Initial result. We need our scientists to look over all the data. That is what it seems to be. And we also did a Middle Eastern intention experiment where I was working in a studio in South England where I was part of a Middle Eastern summit that was projecting my image into 8 conference rooms in 8 different Muslim countries. And so they could see me, and I would see them as one of 9 screens. And the 9th screen was in an auditorium in Jerusalem filled with Israelis. So I had 8 screens full of Muslims and 1 screen full of Jews. And we all set intention to lower violence in an area of Jerusalem, which we chose because, Jerusalem is a city that belongs to all religions. And so we set intention to this area, and that was amazing. We measured some field effects with Roger Nelson's Global Consciousness Project, but the more amazing thing is what happened to the participants. They started, because they could speak to each other and me through all of their screens, the Muslims started sending love to the Israelis. The Israelis started saying things like, "Your God is my God," to the Arabs. And it was just extraordinary, the love, the crying, the connection that these people showed for each other, which is incredible because, as one of the Arabs said to me, this is so amazing because, I've never actually seen a Jew before. I've seen pictures of them in magazines or something, but never, we just aren't shown that. And it's always described to us like these people have horns coming out of their heads. And here they could see they're just normal like they are.
It's really interesting, isn't it? We've got this, Cambridge Analytica thing going on now, and everybody's up in arms about, data being, people, being persuaded to do things that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. When here we have a tool, a really, solid tool where we can actually send intention out into the world. We don't need, bots and computers to influence people. We can, or if if that's going to continue, we can offset that with the power of intention for a little bit of sanity and compassion in the world.
That's a great idea. I think we might need more of that, just judging from the technology we now have and the capability for interference that we now have too.
I remember listening to, I've forgotten her name, but one spiritual teacher who's based somewhere around Tucson, and she was saying, don't get angry about all of these things that are happening. Just set an intention, that they will change and that people will see sense. And I think that's a much, I'm not saying we don't need marches and we don't need people to stand up and, talk about their dissatisfaction. But I think if we could have a lot more people gathering in groups, and just doing intention setting as a daily practice even, we could do, a lot more than we are doing. Are you ever tempted to set an intention experiment to have a bit of sanity and compassion in the White House?
Well, what I've tried to do is really focus on the people themselves. And, for instance, last Saturday was the March for Our Lives, where people in 850 locations around America were marching, and also in the UK, were marching for greater gun control, following the Florida shooting, and this was organized by the 17-year-old survivors. And I set intention, essentially, I had a little live Facebook event and also wrote about the idea of inclusiveness. That one thing the young people did that I thought was very smart is they didn't say guns should be banned. They didn't attack people who had guns. They were saying, let's focus on the values we can all share, which is we don't want guns shooting high school kids, do we? And we don't want mass shootings anymore. So we need greater controls over that. And they even said, I don't want to take away one of the kids said, my dad has a gun and I don't want to take it away from him, but we just need, we need more regulation. And as a result, there were a lot of gun owners who, after the Florida shooting, there was one guy who was extraordinary. He talked right into Facebook. He said he's a Second Amendment, lover who has a tattoo of it on his arm. But he said he had an AR-15, which is semi-automatic, like the guy who used it in Florida. And he said, I love this gun, but I don't want to see a gun like this used ever again to shoot children. And he said, so now there's going to be one less. At which point he pulls out his buzzsaw and he just saws the thing in half on film. And that caused a big copycat response among a lot of gun owners doing the same. And so I think the whole idea of being inclusive and not allowing corrupt politicians or corrupt lobbyists to influence the electorate to make us all understand, we all can agree we don't want kids shot in schools. So let's all band together and not allow them to create divisiveness.
Lynne McTaggart,
so that's been my intention.
And that's a brilliant intention. I heartily endorse that one. Before we close, can you tell our listeners how they can participate in your experiments? And very briefly, what is the next big experiment you've got coming up?
So they can participate by coming to my website, lynnmctaggart.com. They can join in with my various workshops, my retreats, my master classes, my year-long master classes. And if they want to set up a Power of 8 group, they can come on to lynnmctaggart.com/forum, where they can either put up an announcement that they want to start one or join one of the many hundreds of groups forming around the world. And as for my next big experiment, I think we're going to, judging from that Middle Eastern experiment and the extraordinary things that happened, where it pushed peace along a little bit and it made the Middle Eastern newspapers, I think we're going to focus some more on the Middle East and use that kind of technology to bring lots of different people together.
Wonderful. Lynne McTaggart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
The Power of 8 is published by Atria Books and is available at all good bookstores and online. And for more information about all of Lynne's work and her workshops, seminars, groups, etc., visit lynnmctaggart.com. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.